Scattered among the dunes and arid mountains of Arizona, high-security military bases operate far from the public eye. Officially, they are strategic installations used for training and defense technology development. But leaked reports and testimonies from former military personnel suggest that the truth is far more disturbing. Some of these bases house experiments that push the boundaries of conventional science, extreme psychological tests, mind manipulation, and research into advanced cognitive abilities. The goal? To create soldiers capable of predicting enemy movements before they even happen. Men and women turned into living weapons, controlled like pieces on a chessboard. Those who have been there describe an eerie atmosphere, where soldiers train without expressing emotions, where they react to commands before they're even spoken, where they seem to share thoughts, as if connected to a single consciousness. But the experiments don't stop there. Some reports speak of mind control sessions, where recruits were subjected to hypnotic patterns and neurological stimuli, without their consent. Tests on perception and awareness were conducted with no explanations, and those who didn't respond well, they simply disappeared. The few who managed to escape claimed that reality itself felt distorted inside the base, as if their minds were being altered from the inside out. I shouldn't be telling this, but honestly, I have to. I was transferred to Base 16 a few years ago, and to this day, I still can't fully explain what happened there. If anyone knows anything about this facility in the Arizona desert, please tell me. I need to know if I'm crazy or if others have experienced the same thing. The first thing I remember about Base 16 was the dry, suffocating heat. When the helicopter landed, all I could see was a cluster of concrete and fences. None of the buildings had any markings. No flag, no military insignia, nothing. Just gray, lifeless structures in the middle of nowhere. The soldiers who greeted me, something was wrong with them. They didn't ask for my name, didn't welcome me, didn't even ask where I was from. They just stared at me blankly and led me inside. There was no conversation between them. No jokes, no complaints about the unbearable heat. Just an unsettling silence that made me feel like I was the only normal human there. I was taken straight to the infirmary for a routine checkup. Normally, in places like this, the doctors at least try to make small talk, ask how you're feeling. But not here. The doctor, a thin, pale man, just scribbled a few notes on a tablet without ever making contact. When it was over, one of the soldiers escorted me to my dormitory and left without saying a word. The dorm itself felt off. The bunk beds were perfectly aligned, each one covered with the same dull gray blanket, with no personal touches anywhere. But what disturbed me the most was the behavior of the other soldiers. They were there, sitting on their beds, just staring at the floor. Some blinked slowly, others barely seemed to breathe. No one spoke. I tried striking up a conversation with the guy in the bed next to mine. "Hey man, when did you get here?" He looked at me for a second. His face was blank, completely devoid of emotion. Then, without a word, he just turned, his head forward again. That was the moment my stomach dropped. I've been on military bases before. I've seen exhausted soldiers, depressed soldiers, even traumatized ones. But this was different. This wasn't fatigue. It was something deeper. That first night, I had the worst insomnia of my life. I tossed and turned, trying to ignore the feeling that something was watching me in the dark, because deep down I knew something was wrong. The first week at Base 16 was strangely normal. The training was tough, but nothing I hadn't done before. Running, hand-to-hand combat, military tactics. The only real problem was the oppressive atmosphere of the base. The soldiers remained silent, following orders without hesitation like robots. But then, things started getting weird. On the morning of the 5th day, a sergeant I had never seen before appeared and called my name. He didn't explain anything, just told me to follow him. He led me to a building different from the others, more isolated. As soon as we entered, the air felt colder, and a metallic smell hit me immediately, like a room that never sees daylight. They made me sit in a metal chair, placed in the center of a sterile, windowless white room. In front of me, a man in a white lab coat flipped through a file. He looked at me with an almost clinical curiosity. "Soldier Carter, close your eyes and think of a number between 1 and 10. I felt an immediate discomfort, but I did as he asked. Before I could say anything, he spoke in a calm, precise voice. 7. My eyes snapped open. My heart started pounding. He got it right. How did you do that?" I asked, trying to sound casual. The man just smiled and made a note in his file. "Thank you for participating, Soldier Carter. You may go now." I left the room dazed, but I tried to convince myself it was just a psychological trick. Some kind of body language reading, some statistical probability. Nothing special. But then, the real tests began. In the following days, they sent me into dark rooms with screens flashing hypnotic patterns. Sometimes I heard whispers, words I couldn't understand. Other times I just sat there staring at geometric shapes that seemed to move even when I blinked. But the worst part came at night. I started having strange dreams, more vivid each time. I dreamed of faces I had never seen, but somehow they felt familiar. I dreamed of places I had never been, yet I knew exactly where every door led. And the scariest part? Sometimes I woke up in the middle of the night with the unshakable feeling that I wasn't alone in the room. As if something was watching me in the dark, and the more I tried to ignore it, the worse the dreams became. It was during a combat training session that I realized something was seriously wrong. The exercises were the same as always. Attack and defense drills, immobilization techniques, rapid reaction training. I had trained with dozens of soldiers over the years, but I had never seen anything like this before. My opponent was a soldier named Henderson. I had never spoken to him, and honestly I wasn't even sure I had ever heard his voice. But the moment the fight began, it became clear that he knew exactly what I was going to do before I even moved. I threw a strike at his ribs. He was already dodging before my fist got close. I changed my strategy, faking a punch and going for a quick leg sweep. He was already moving to the side before my kick even connected. By the third attempt, he didn't even wait for me to attack. He dodged before my brain had even made the decision. I stopped breathing heavily, trying to process what had just happened. "How the hell did you do that?" I asked. Henderson just stood there, staring at me. His expression never changed. Not for a second, no reaction, no sweat, no exhaustion, nothing. The instructor blew the whistle, ending the match. But that feeling, the cold, creeping discomfort, was already buried deep under my skin. And it wasn't just Henderson. In the days that followed, I noticed other soldiers doing the same thing. During training, some of them reacted before they were even given commands, moving in perfect sync, as if they shared the same thoughts. And sometimes, they would just stop, in the middle of an exercise, motionless, their eyes fixed on something invisible, staring at a point far beyond the room, as if they had slipped into a deep trance. Nobody commented, nobody questioned it. But I knew something was happening, and for the first time since arriving at Base 16, I started to feel real fear. That morning they called my name again, another test. I already knew I had no choice. This time they led me to a different building, one with endless underground hallways stretching out like a maze. The walls were smooth and white, no windows, no markings, nothing to indicate where I really was. It felt like a place outside of time, disconnected from the world above. The air smelled strange, metallic, artificial, like it had never properly circulated. They made me sit in a reclined chair in the center of a cold, sterile room. Dr. Whitmore was there, clipboard in hand, his gaze clinical as ever. 2 soldiers stood by the door, motionless as statues. "Relax, Soldier Carter. Let's begin." An assistant attached electrodes to my head. Silence. Then the screen in front of me flickered to life. At first, it was just flashing geometric patterns, nothing out of the ordinary. But then, the whispers began. They weren't coming from speakers. They were inside my head, words in a language I didn't recognize, but somehow felt familiar. The sound was low, persistent, like something trying to crawl into my thoughts. Then, my vision blurred. My body tingled. My arm moved on its own. Panic flooded through me. I tried to shout, but my mouth wouldn't respond. I felt my fingers tighten around the handle of a combat knife resting on the table beside me. But I hadn't reached for it before. I could understand what was happening. The blade rose to my neck. My pulse exploded, pounding so hard it felt like my heart would burst through my chest. The cold metal pressed against my skin, just enough for me to feel the realness of the threat. But I wasn't the one holding the knife. My hand was. But it wasn't me controlling it. My arm trembled, but not because I was resisting. It felt like two wills were fighting inside me, one trying to take control, the other desperately clinging to whatever was left of itself. And then, just like that, it stopped, as if someone had cut the strings of a puppet. The knife clattered to the floor. I collapsed with it, gasping for air, my entire body shaking violently. Footsteps. Whitmore approached. He still has resistance. His voice was low, but I heard it, and I knew. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to one of the officers. This wasn't just a test. It was an attempt at control. And in that moment, I finally understood. Base 16 wasn't just training soldiers. They were programming our minds. I was losing control of my own mind. After that test, after the knife at my throat, after Whitmore said I still had resistance, one thought kept repeating in my head. What happens when I don't? I needed to understand what they were doing here. And I needed to get out, before it was too late. But at Base 16, there was no such thing as getting out. That night, I waited until the other soldiers were asleep. The dormitory was completely silent, except for the breathing. Slow, deep breaths, all at the same rhythm, synchronized, like they were one single thing, breathing together. A chill ran down my spine, but I ignored it. I got up slowly, careful not to make a sound. The door wasn't locked. When I opened it, the hallway was empty. No guards and no patrols, like no one here even considered escaping. I walked fast but didn't run. I tried to look like just another soldier following orders, even though I had none. My footsteps echoed against the smooth floor. With every corner I turned, my heart pounded harder. And then, I saw it, a door slightly open, a dim monitor light flickering inside. I looked around. No one. I stepped inside and shut the door behind me. The room was small, filled with filing cabinets and a single metal desk with a computer still on. On the screen, a document was open. At the top, a title made my blood run cold. Project Mindstorm. Cognitive Control Directives. My fingers trembled as I started reading. They were programming us. This wasn't just hypnosis. It wasn't just psychological manipulation. It was absolute control. According to the documents, soldiers were being conditioned to obey before they even received orders consciously. Using hypnotic patterns, auditory stimuli, and induced memory implants, Project Mindstorm was turning soldiers into living combat tools, able to predict and execute commands before anyone even gave them. That's why the soldiers in training moved before the orders. They weren't reacting. They already knew what to do, because it was already in their heads. But the worst part came next. I kept scrolling down. I found a list of names. Some had a green code beside them. Others had a red one. The ones in red had only one term next to them. Discarded. My stomach twisted. Soldiers who didn't respond well to the conditioning didn't get transferred. They disappeared. And then, I saw something that made my blood freeze. My name, it was on the list, and next to it, in yellow, a single word that made me want to throw up. Unstable. I staggered back from the screen, my breathing heavy. They were watching me, testing me, and if I didn't become one of them, I knew exactly what would happen to me. I had to get out, but before I could even think of a plan, I heard footsteps outside. Someone was coming. I had to get out. My mind was still processing what I had just read. Project Mindstorm, the conditioning, the programmed soldiers, the ones who were discarded, and my own name on the list, unstable. That meant I wasn't fully under control yet. But it was only a matter of time before I was, or before they decided to get rid of me. I stepped out of the room, my heart pounding in my chest. The hallway was still empty, but now it didn't feel like luck. It felt like a trap. I forced myself to stay calm and headed toward the armory. If I was going to escape, I needed a weapon. To my surprise, there was no resistance. The room was empty. I grabbed a pistol, a rifle, and a combat knife. No alarms, no guards. Something was wrong. But I didn't care. I couldn't hesitate anymore. I moved through the complex, sticking to the shadows, slipping past warehouses and storage buildings, all the way to the perimeter fence. Beyond it, the Arizona desert stretched out, a dark and endless void beneath the starry sky. I was so close. And then, I saw them. A group of soldiers already waiting by the gates. They weren't holding weapons, they weren't moving. They were just standing there, watching me. The air grew heavy. My chest tightened. I knew this wasn't normal. And then, they spoke. All of them, at the same time. The same voice, the same tone, like a twisted choir. "Return to the dormitory, Soldier Carter." Pain exploded inside my skull, like a shockwave ripping through my brain. I dropped to my knees, gripping my head. My whole body burned. I tried to resist. I fought back, but then I felt it. My legs moved on their own, one step backward, then another and another. My feet were walking without my permission, dragging me back into the base. I couldn't stop. They were controlling me. By the time I realized what had happened, I was back in the dormitory, lying in my bed, sweating, trembling. And then, everything went black. I woke up feeling light. I couldn't remember my dreams. In fact, I couldn't remember much at all about the night before. I slowly opened my eyes. The dormitory was silent, as always. The other soldiers were already up, making their beds, getting ready for the day, and I did the same. I got up, folded my sheets with precision, and put on my uniform without thinking, without questioning. There was something strange about it. But the feeling faded quickly. The day's training felt just like any other running, combat drills, tactical instruction. I followed every order automatically. No hesitation, no doubt. My body moved smoothly, like every action was natural, like I knew what to do before the commands were even given. And for some reason, that didn't bother me. Didn't think much about what had happened before. My memories felt hazy, distant. Every time I tried to recall something, the computer, the documents, the desperation from the night before, my mind simply shifted away, like there was nothing there to remember. And suddenly I felt calm. From a distance, Dr. Whitmore watched. He scribbled something on his clipboard, his face blank but satisfied. In his report, he wrote only one sentence. The experiment was a success. My name is Logan Barrett. I'm 34 years old, and I spent 6 of those years serving in the United States Army. I was never a hero, never decorated. I was just another soldier following orders, doing my job, until something happened. Something that still haunts me to this day. I woke up suddenly, drenched in cold sweat. The room was dark, dimly lit by the flickering red sign of the motel outside. My chest rose and fell rapidly, like I had just finished running. The dream had been the same, always the same. I was back at Fort Huachuca. I could smell the mix of metal and damp earth in the air. I could hear the sound of my own footsteps echoing through the narrow underground hallways of the facility. And then, the blackout, total darkness. And after that, nothing. I ran a hand over my face and forced myself to sit up. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:27 a.m. I sighed. There was no point in trying to sleep again. I got up and walked over to the small desk in the corner of the room. Scattered across it, between crushed cigarette packs and empty energy drink cans, was my notebook. Ever since I was discharged from the Army, I've been trying to piece together what happened to me at the base. But no matter how hard I tried, there were gaps, holes where my memory should have been. I ran my fingers over the pages, messy notes, scribbled out words, incomplete sentences, arrows pointing to places I no longer remembered. Something was erased from my mind. The first blackout happened on a random night. No warning, no explanation. It was 2017. I had only been at Fort Huachuca for a few months, assigned to a project that required access to the base's underground sectors. Officially, we were working on cybersecurity and surveillance, but there were areas even mid-level officers couldn't access. That night, I was out on a perimeter reconnaissance exercise with 4 other soldiers. We moved in formation, silent and focused, when suddenly I felt a wave of dizziness, like an electric current running down my spine. The world around me seemed to fade for a second, and then everything blinked. The next moment, I was somewhere else. I blinked rapidly, my heart pounding. I was now inside one of the administrative buildings near the medical wing. My rifle was still slung over my shoulder, and when I checked my watch, only 6 minutes had passed since I last looked at it. But I had no memory of walking there. The radio crackled to life. "Barrett, what's your position?" It was Sergeant McCall. My mouth was dry. I had no idea what to say. I forced myself to step outside, spotting my team about 500 meters away. When I told them what had happened, they laughed. "What kind of trick is this, Barrett? You sleepwalked your way here?" Did my best to laugh along, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The first night after the blackout, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like something was off. Like there was a missing second between the moment I blinked and the moment I woke up. As if parts of my time were disappearing. Tried to ignore it. Tried to go about my routine as usual. But then the voices started. At first, I thought it was just exhaustion. I spent hours in the base's underground tunnels, analyzing security panels and monitoring data that even some officers didn't seem to understand. Sometimes the silence down there was so absolute that I'd start hearing phantom noises. Or at least, that's what I told myself. But then, the whispers followed me outside the base too. They came in the middle of the night, just before I drifted off to sleep. Scattered words, disjointed phrases, voices layered over each other like multiple people speaking at the same time, too low and too far away to fully understand. Relocate, access denied, Zone 5. Then came the names I had never heard before. Carter, Jensen, Holloway. Who were these people? By the third day, the voices started coming even when I was awake. I could be walking down a hallway, doing a training drill, and suddenly, "Barrett," someone calling me, but when I turned, no one was there. I thought about telling someone, but how the hell would I even explain it? That's when I realized I wasn't the only one. In the mess hall, Vasquez sat next to me. He was usually a quiet guy, kept to himself, but that afternoon he looked on edge, barely touched his food. "Have you been hearing weird things?" he asked, not looking at me. My stomach dropped. "What do you mean by weird?" He took a slow breath. Whispers. My fingers tightened around my fork. "What do they say?" Vasquez swallowed hard. "I don't know, but they know who I am." We sat there in silence. I wanted to ask more, but something held me back. It was fear. Because deep down, I knew the voices knew who I was too. I woke up in the middle of the night, chest tight, breath shallow, like someone had just shaken me awake. The barracks were dark, the only light coming from a flickering bulb in the hallway. That's when I heard it. But this time, it wasn't scattered whispers or overlapping voices speaking in fragmented phrases. It was a single voice, clear, firm, and the most terrifying part? It was inside my head. "Get up, go to Zone 5. My entire body tensed, my muscles locked up, and then I moved. Not because I wanted to, because something else willed it. My right leg shifted first, then the left. By the time I realized what was happening, I was already sitting up, my feet touching the cold floor. My mind screamed at me to stop, but my body wasn't mine anymore. I stood up, palms slick with sweat. One step, then another. I didn't want to walk, but my body was already in the hallway. Every movement felt mechanical, rigid, like I was in a trance. Every cell in my body begged me to fight back, but something pulled me forward. My heart pounded. My breathing was shallow, and with every step, the voice repeated, relentless. Go to Zone 5. Zone 5. The underground facility. The most restricted sector of the base. I wasn't authorized to go there, but my feet kept moving, one after the other, like they were following a programmed command. I fought against it. My mind was panicking, desperate to regain control. My arms trembled. My vision blurred. Then, with every ounce of strength I had left, I resisted. My knees buckled. My body collapsed onto the cold hallway floor. And then, the voice stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, then rushed footsteps. "Barrett, you good?" I opened my eyes. 2 soldiers stood over me, confused. "Did he black out?" one asked. "No clue. He looks exhausted." They helped me to my feet, muttering something about stress. I just nodded. Didn't say a word, because I knew this wasn't stress. Something, or someone, tried to take me to Zone 5, and I had no idea what would have happened if I hadn't been able to stop it. Since leaving the military, my life had become a series of unanswered questions. But that night, sitting on the edge of my motel bed, I decided I needed to find something. Anything. I opened my laptop and went straight to ex-military forums, the kind of places where guys like me talked about things we weren't supposed to. Conspiracies, black projects, experimental technologies. Most of it was nonsense. People rambling about things they'd never actually experienced. But sometimes, someone posted something real. I searched for Fort Huachuca. There wasn't much beyond the usual public information. But buried deep in an old discussion thread, I found a conversation about neurological testing on soldiers. Fort Huachuca isn't just about simulations and drones. They mess with your head there. Ask the ones who've been to Zone 5. My fingers froze over the keyboard. Zone 5. The user who posted it had been inactive for years. No other posts. No clues about who they were. I kept digging. I searched public records, declassified reports. Nothing solid, just documents on training and surveillance. But then, I found a declassified file. It mentioned an experiment on advanced cognitive conditioning conducted at Fort Huachuca in 2016 and 2017. The exact years I was there. I opened the PDF. Most of the text was blacked out, but some words slipped through the redaction. Involuntary. Response testing. Successful in individuals with high neurological susceptibility. Cases of consciousness displacement. Consciousness displacement. I kept reading, scanning for anything that made sense, until one sentence stopped me cold. Full activation has not yet been observed, but simple commands such as automatic locomotion and passive obedience have proven effective. My blood turned to ice. Automatic locomotion, the voices, the blackouts. That night in the hallway when I was forced to walk, I immediately exited the site and slammed my laptop shut. My heart was pounding. What else had they done to me? How many times had I obeyed without knowing? And the worst question of all, was I still under their control? The days that followed, I started feeling like someone was watching me. At first, I thought it was just paranoia. After what I found in those redacted files, my mind was in high alert mode. But then, I saw him. The first time was at a gas station late at night. A man in a dark suit standing across the street doing nothing, just watching. When I turned to grab my change and looked back, he was gone. Then, at a supermarket parking lot, same posture, same neutral expression, and just like before, the moment I blinked, he vanished. It kept happening at a cafe in a store window reflection. Across the street as I crossed, always still, always watching. Then one morning as I stepped out of the motel where I was staying, I saw an envelope tucked under my car's windshield wiper. No sender, no markings, nothing. My stomach tightened. With trembling fingers, I tore open the top and pulled out a single sheet of paper inside. There was only one sentence, typed in a plain font, no signature. "You've followed more orders than you realize." A cold shiver ran down my spine. My eyes scanned the empty parking lot. No one was there, not a soul in sight. But I knew. Someone was watching me. Someone knew what happened to me, and the worst part, I still had no idea what I had done. I spent 2 days without sleeping properly after finding that envelope. The message inside wouldn't leave my head. "You've followed more orders than you realize." What did it mean? What could I have done without remembering it? Then, on the 3rd day, my phone rang. Unknown number? I hesitated but answered. Barrett. I recognized the voice immediately. Vasquez. "I need to see you. Now." There was urgency in his voice, something that made me jump out of bed instantly. "Where are you?" He hesitated for a second. "There's a motel on the edge of town, the Red Pine. Meet me there in an hour." The Red Pine was one of those run-down roadside motels, mostly used by truckers and people who didn't want to be found. The perfect place for a conversation that wasn't supposed to happen. When I arrived, Vasquez was already there, leaning against the hood of his car, scanning the parking lot like he expected someone to step out of the shadows. "They're after me too." Those were the first words out of his mouth as I walked up to him. "The man in the suit?" Vasquez nodded. "Ever since I left the base, I knew something was off. But these past few weeks, I've felt like I'm being followed." I glanced around, feeling that familiar weight on the back of my neck. "You called me here for a reason. What did you find out?" He took a deep breath. "There's a guy, worked at the base, one of the researchers. He knows something." My fists clenched. "Did you talk to him?" "Not yet, but he agreed to meet us." My heartbeat picked up. "When?" Vasquez motioned toward the motel entrance with his head. "He's here." I turned to look. A half-open door on the 2nd floor, shadows shifting inside. I had no idea what I was about to walk into. But one thing was certain. Someone was finally ready to talk. The motel room was stifling. The smell of stale cigarette smoke clung to the curtains, mixing with the heavy air, thick with tension. The man sitting across from me looked worn out, like someone who knew too much and had spent too long running from it. He didn't say his name. He didn't need to. "You weren't part of a simple training program." His voice was rough, low, like he was afraid someone might hear him even here. "What happened at Fort Huachuca is part of an experiment that goes far beyond what you think." My fingers clenched into fists against the table. "What kind of experiment?" He looked at me, then at Vasquez before rubbing his face, carefully choosing his words. "The government has been researching neural control for decades. Hypnosis, subliminal messaging, experimental implants. But Huachuca was different. They tested low-frequency radio waves to implant commands directly into soldiers' subconscious minds." My breathing became uneven. "Commands." The man nodded. "Keywords, specific phrases, orders you received without realizing it." Vasquez shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "That doesn't make sense. How would that even work?" "The human brain operates at specific frequencies. Their technology allowed them to induce receptive states without you knowing. During sleep, under stress, in moments of exhaustion, a sharp pain began to pound in my head. Have you ever found yourself in a place without remembering how you got there? Ever caught yourself doing something without knowing why? The blackouts. The voices. That moment in the hallway when my own body started moving on its own. The man watched us in silence before continuing. Some soldiers were more receptive than others. "And you two?" He hesitated for a moment. "You were at the top of the list." I leaned forward. "And Zone 5? The man took a deep breath before answering. "Zone 5 was where the commands were tested at an advanced level. I don't know everything that happened inside, but I know some soldiers went in and never came out." A chill ran down my spine. "Is there anything else we need to know?" Vasquez asked, his voice tense. The man took a long pause. His eyes moved from me to Vasquez before he finally said the words that would keep me awake for the rest of my life. "You might not be free yet." The silence in the room became suffocating. "What do you mean?" My voice came out hoarse. He leaned in, his eyes dark. "What if there are commands that haven't been activated yet?" My chest tightened. "What if you can still be controlled?" The silence in the room felt too heavy. After the researcher spoke those words, I felt my heart racing in a way that didn't feel normal. A wave of heat surged through my body, but my hands were ice cold. What if there are commands that haven't been activated yet? I swallowed hard. What if I was still under control? The researcher kept talking, but my mind was already far away. I thought about the blackouts, the voices, the night I was forced to walk toward Zone 5. I didn't want to move, but I moved anyway. What if it happened again? Vasquez stood up, snapping me out of my thoughts. "I need to grab something from the car. Be right back." He stepped outside, closing the door behind him. I watched him walk through the dimly lit parking lot through the grimy motel window. And then it happened. A faint static filled my ears like a distant buzzing, slowly growing louder. My muscles locked up. Then, a voice. "Eliminate the contact." Panic took hold of me. My body went cold, but my hand was already moving. I didn't tell it to. My fingers slid to the holster at my waist. My breath shortened. No, no, no. I could feel my muscles tightening, my arms slowly lifting. My fingers wrapped around the grip of my pistol. I was holding my gun. The researcher sitting across from me had no idea. He kept talking, completely unaware that my body was no longer mine. I tried to let go, but my fingers wouldn't listen. My head pounded, my vision blurred. Eliminate the contact. The barrel aligned with his chest. I had to resist. Now, my hands started shaking. I forced my fingers to loosen, to drop the gun. My mind screamed, trying to drag me back into control. Then, using every ounce of strength left in my body, I turned the gun away and pulled the trigger. The gunshot ripped through the silence, shattering the motel mirror. Glass exploded across the floor. The researcher jumped from his chair, eyes wide. Vasquez kicked the door open, his own weapon drawn. What the hell was that? My hand was still trembling. Sweat dripped down my face, my heart slamming against my ribs. I looked at Vasquez, then at the researcher. They still control me. The researcher didn't say a word, but the look on his face told me he already knew, and that terrified me even more. My hand was still shaking. The scent of gunpowder clung to the stale motel air. Shattered glass glistened on the floor, reflecting the dim glow of the bedside lamp. The echo of the gunshot still rang in my ears. The researcher was pale, speechless. Vasquez stared at me like he wasn't sure if he should point his gun at me or at the door. But I knew exactly what had just happened. They still control me. I needed to get out. I shoved the chair back and rushed to the door. Vasquez grabbed my arm. "Barrett, wait, what are you gonna do? I didn't know. I just knew I couldn't stay. If I stay near you, I might kill someone." Vasquez hesitated. 1 second. That was all I needed. I pushed past him and sprinted into the hallway. My heart was pounding, my mind racing. I had no idea where I was going. I just had to disappear. I ran into the parking lot. The night air was cold, the pavement damp, reflecting the yellow glow of the streetlights. My hands were still trembling, my legs weak. Then, I looked up and froze. Across the street, leaning against a lamppost, he was there, the man in the suit. This time, he didn't vanish. He didn't look away. He just stood there watching me. And then, he smiled. A slow, calculated smile. Like he knew something I didn't. Like everything had already been decided before I even thought about running. I didn't wait to find out what he'd do next. I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't go back to the motel. I didn't take anything with me. Just the clothes on my back and the cold certainty that I could never trust anyone again. Now I'm a ghost. I hide. I move from city to city. I live in the shadows, trying to figure out how to erase what they did to me before they activate me again, before I lose control for the last time. And every night, before I fall asleep, Only, one thought repeats in my head. How many orders have I followed without even knowing? Now, the question. No one wants to answer. What really happens in these underground laboratories? Are we just witnessing technological advancements? Or is something far darker being developed? Something beyond our understanding? After this chilling journey through the silent experiment of Fort Huachuca, one question lingers. What if you've already followed orders without realizing it? If you enjoyed this story and want more disturbing tales, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones, and of course share this with your friends. Who knows? Maybe one of them has already been activated without knowing it. See you in the next video. If no one erases our memories before then, stay alert.